If you live in America today, you need food, shelter, clean water, electricity, and a place to put your head at night. How do you get that? That is given to you by dollars. The entire well-being and health and survival is based upon a paper rectangle that is printed by the Federal Reserve. What if all of a sudden the dollar was to precipitate? It no longer gave you goods or services in exchange for it. You would have to find another means of exchange in order to get food, water, keep your electricity on, keep your shelter. Not only would it affect drastically the citizens of the United States, but it would affect the entire global economy as a whole. Because the US dollar in 1970 was made the global currency. Saudi Arabia started trading their oil reserves for dollars, and that created a domino effect. In a sense, we obfuscated them to us for protection of military power. As a result, if the dollar were to lose its purchasing power, China would suffer because they are the number one producing economy. Saudi Arabia would suffer, and so would most of the major world commercially. But the issue is, the United States right now is not able to add more dollars in order to circulate the system itself. Putting things into its most simplistic form, where do you think of in terms of a business establishment when you think of money? You think of banks, right? Banks are supposed to loan money, are supposed to house money, and to be the institution that regulates the law of the sea. Without going into much detail, your cash flow comes from the bank. It's based upon the law of the sea. It is what it is. But basically, the banks are not able to function. The Federal Reserve is having to bail out the banks through banks repo. So ask yourself this question. Just really, how much is $1 billion? Well, to carry $1 million, you might need a small bag. 1 billion is 1,000 million. 100 million, rather. And to carry $1 billion, it would take a large truck. 1 billion in the bank would be enough to take over the bottom 15 countries' economies individually. If you're really dedicated and could spend $20 per second, you could spend $1 billion in 578 days. So if you spent $20 per second, it would take you 1 year and 214 days to spend it all. If you could save $100 a day, it would take you 10 million days to save up $1 billion. That's 27,387.26 years. To put that into perspective, $350 billion has been injected in investment banks in 4 days, and the banks are still asking for more. The markets are not functioning if the banks need $75 billion a day in new cash just for their day-to-day operations. JP Morgan Chase has taken $53 billion in new cash from the Fed in 3 days. That is 22% of what the entire company is worth. The world's largest investment bank needing $12.5 billion every day in newly printed cash from the Fed to provide cash on the books. 75 billion a day equals 400 billion in the last 4 days and 2 trillion by the end of October. So to put this into perspective, the banks do not have enough money in their reserves to loan, to store, and in essence, that means that these banks are running out of reserves. And if that is the case, where are you going to get your money? So the United States cannot simply print more money, inject it into the system through quantitative easing, and expect for the system to flow as normal as it normally would. That's because the United States made a fundamental mistake. What they should have done after the crash of 2008 are 2 specific things. Number 1, they should have implemented Glass-Steagall, which was part of FDR's banking holiday. Basically, make it illegal for investment banks to use regular investments in speculative investing. So they couldn't take my money or your money and use it to invest in derivatives or houses again. Also, they should have broken up the largest banks like JP Morgan, Citigroup into smaller subsidiaries. That way, if one of those banks failed, it would not crash the entire global economy. But instead, they chose to inject trillions of dollars into the system instead of just letting the system reset itself. In order to ease the pains of the recession, they bailed out the banks through TARP, $700 billion plus more. They also decided to print money, keep interest rates low to add more cash to the system. In essence, what that precipitated was tons of money being injected into the system. Now, the issue is it wasn't enough. The banks do not even have enough money to keep their reserves on hand. They are needing billions a day, 75 billion a day pumped into them just to function. But what about interest rates? Interest rates are already excruciatingly low. You can't bring down interest rates because they're already low. What about the production? We can produce in the economy making real goods and services in order to pay the bills. But the problem is debt to GDP is 103%. What that means is that's input, how much you owe versus how much you earn. Our debt is 22 trillion and the entire GDP of the country is 21.338 trillion. That is similar. Say that you have a household. You make $50,000 a year. You have 2 people living in your household, including yourself. Well, all of a sudden you get more people. Your bills increase, but you're still making the same amount of money. So the United States cannot lower interest rates anymore because they're already super low. They cannot produce more in order to pay their bills because their debt to GDP ratio. And they also have already printed trillions of dollars, injecting it into the system. That is not working. Well, if you look at 2008 and you study it, you dissect it on a macro level, you notice once you get into a micro level that China bought a large reserve of U.S. treasuries after the banking crash of 2008. Then you get into China owning U.S. debt. Now, a lot of people like to say China owns us. It is kind of one of those things that is regurgitated quite often. When I first heard that claim, I was very incredulous, but I wasn't astute enough to understand on a deeper level. But the specific numbers, because I like to do research before I talk. I don't like to talk and not know what the hell I'm talking about. So the U.S. debt to China is 1.11 trillion in 2019. So that's 27% of the 4.1 trillion in treasury notes and bonds held by foreign countries. So 27% of our debt is owned by China. That does not mean China owns us, as a lot of individuals want to claim. They are basing that opinion on conjecture. That is not the full scope of things. And of course, the rest of that debt, 22 trillion, is owned by either the American people or by the U.S. government itself. China has the largest amount of U.S. debt held by a foreign country. Japan comes in second at 1.10 trillion. It's followed by the United Kingdom at 332 billion, Brazil at 306, and Ireland at 271 billion. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would China do this? And why would the U.S. allow China to partake in this activity? When I give people an example to explain this interesting dynamic, think of two parents that went through a rough divorce. They need to go to the kids' graduation. They don't like each other. They are not fans of each other, but they need to be collegial in order to get along for a common purpose. Instead of arguing, they come together so they can both enjoy the graduation, enjoy the dinner to see their kid. They both are working towards a common goal. Well, China is more than happy to own almost a fifth of the U.S. debt owned by foreigners. Owning U.S. Treasury notes helps China's economy grow. It keeps the yuan weak relative to the dollar. As a result, Chinese exports are less expensive than U.S. products. China's highest priority is creating enough jobs for its 1.4 billion people. The United States allowed China to become one of its biggest bankers because Americans enjoy low consumer prices. Selling debt to China pays for federal spending. It also keeps U.S. interest rates low. Now, here's where I get into this. Not only did the U.S. government buy stocks in the largest banks, and we had TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, but you also had $600 billion worth of treasury bonds that were sold. And about half of that China purchased in order to keep the United States currency stable, which in essence kept the global economy stable, and the U.S. economy, which is the world's largest consumer economy, stable, so we could keep buying Chinese products in order to provide jobs for their 1.4 billion citizens. Now, being mindful of that fact, China is also building a lot of things in their country. It is pretty fascinating if you take time to look this up, but they have an entire replica of New York City that was built. The geographic location is exactly similar, but no one lives there. China is in an economic bubble. They are building a lot of things like a hamster on a wheel. So they need the dollar to be stable, so we keep buying their products. Saudi Arabia needs it for the oil, and so on and so forth. The conundrum that we are in, the kerfuffle, is that we can't bring down interest rates any lower. We can't have production pay our bills because the debt to GDP is 103%. We owe more than we produce. We're in the negative. We're already printing money. The Federal Reserve is printing billions a day injecting it into the system, but the system still needs more to pay its bills. China made the claim today, and I know CNN and the mainstream media are too busy worrying about an impeachment, which is bullshit. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Trump supporter. I'm saying that because the Senate is controlled by Republicans. Politics is about power. The Republicans know that if they impeach the president, they will lose all their seats, all their political power. So out of self-interest, they will vote down the impeachment charge. It is all bullshit. It is all a dog and pony show to get ratings for these big corporations that own the media. But that's neither here nor there. I digress. China said today it will not bail out the U.S. economy this time. So the question is, how is the United States going to get money? It can't print it, can't lower interest rates. China is not going to buy U.S. treasuries. And it's already tried printing money. It can't pay its bills because it has to pay more than it produces. Just a little thing for you to think about as we prepare for the next recession. Then they're going to blame it all on Trump, even though in 2008 the infrastructure was in place that led to this catastrophe. It's all going to be his fault. Trump supporters are going to be blamed, and we all know the predictability of the media.